So using this equation on the upper left right here, I'm projecting that we need to win at least 99 games in order to make it to the postseason.
Ever seen the movie Moneyball? If you haven't, it follows the struggles of the Oakland A's. Not exactly winning baseball team. In 2002, the A's had a small budget and were competing with better funded teams to recruit players. Obviously, they were missing out. Then Peter Brand, an advisor, played by Jonah Hill, arrives. He's a soft-spoken economics grad who has a new idea about how to choose players.
What's this?
Brad Pitt plays his boss, Billy Beane, constantly spitting dip.
This is the code that I've written for our year-to-year projections. We'll find value in players that nobody else can see. People are overlooked for a variety of biased reasons and perceived flaws. Age, appearance, and personality.
As numbers, spreadsheets, code, and graphs from studies flash across the screen, Brand explains a new recruiting philosophy to Billy Beane.
Bill James and mathematics cut straight through that. There is a championship team of 25 people that we could afford because everyone else in baseball undervalues them, like an island of misfit toys.
Instead of going after superstars, they would acquire undervalued players. Players who were undervalued because, in Brand's point of view, conventional scouting was outdated and too subjective. Here's the kind of player they're talking about.
His defect is that he throws funny. Nobody in the big league cares about him because he looks funny. This guy could be not just the best pitcher in our bullpen, but one of the most effective relief pitchers in all of baseball. This guy should cost $3 million a year. We can get him for $237,000.
It becomes clear that there are some things that software and modeling can see that humans don't. All people see is this guy's weird throw. The numbers reveal that he's a valuable player. With modeling and statistics, the Oakland A's overcame their small budget and finished first in their league in the next season. Like all great movies, Moneyball is based on a book. It's by Michael Lewis, and the full title is Moneyball: The Art of Winning in an Unfair Game. The unfair game is money in baseball and the ruthless drive for efficiency that capitalism demands. That's how Lewis puts it. The odds were stacked against the A's, but they used statistics and mathematics to punch above their weight. Could this approach work outside of baseball? Today, I'm going to tell you about another group with a small budget and a big job, the Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA is, among other things, in charge of inspecting hazardous waste sites, making sure that the waste is properly stored and treated so that it never gets out. There are thousands of these sites across the country. Not all of them can be inspected. Could the Moneyball approach help? I'm Amy Harder, and you're listening to Shocked. Today, Moneyball for the environment.
Here's a thing that you don't want to see at an EPA inspection. One time we had inspectors going to a facility and someone had spray painted on a wall, "Help, EPA." Anyway, that's untypical.
This is Cynthia Giles. She was an environmental litigator for decades before being asked to lead EPA's Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance. Does that title sound very bureaucratic?
How reporters often describe my job is the top environmental cop for the United States.
She held that position for 8 years. As the top cop, Cynthia was in charge of enforcing many laws, but one category that is especially hard is hazardous waste. The term hazardous waste might seem vague, but it does have a specific legal meaning.
Hazardous waste can be made out of any manufacturing process you can imagine. Name anything. There's likely to be some hazardous waste. And one of the challenges with it is, of course, there's a huge range of types of waste, many, many different types. So you have heavy metals, you have other known carcinogens, incredibly acidic, significant toxins. If you get a release of those materials either into the ground, which seeps into the groundwater, which is a drinking water source for many people and eventually makes its way to surface waters usually, get a release into surface water, you could have a shutdown of a drinking water system.
So hazardous waste can come from anywhere. And unlike other types of pollution, air or water pollution, where a little bit of pollution is actually allowed, the law that governs hazardous waste is all about preventing it from entering the environment. Period.
By the time a hazardous waste is released into the environment, goes into the river that's a drinking water source, or goes up into the air as toxic gas, you're way too late. The harm is already happening.
Here's an example.
So there's a recent case that EPA did in my home state of Rhode Island. Interplex Engineered Products is the name of the company. They make electrical conductors in Rhode Island. And EPA did an inspection there and discovered that they were storing cyanide waste in 55-gallon drums near a drainage trench. Also near the drainage trench, in another part of the facility, they were storing sulfuric acid. Yikes! It creates a toxic, inflammable vapor. If it's set on fire, a toxic gas. Okay, you really don't want that. They had lots of other violations too, like didn't have labels on the drums. Okay, labels are very important. For example, if there's a fire and the fire department is responding to it, they need to know that the stuff in this particular drum should not have water on it. Okay, that's something the fire department should know. They had to come into compliance, and they paid a penalty of $60,000. So that's a fairly small case in the EPA world. The reason it's small is because EPA found it before the catastrophe happened. When you see a really big hazardous waste case, that often means the bad thing already happened.
The main way that violations are caught is via inspection at those sites.
There isn't some external place to monitor. Did you put labels on your drums? Okay, there's nowhere to look for that in any external way. And the only way to observe that is through doing an inspection.
There's just one problem.
Inspection resource is a limited resource. There's only a handful of people available to do inspections. The biggest issue for inspectors is there's not enough of them and there's never enough time.
Even if the EPA somehow got millions of dollars just to hire inspectors, it wouldn't help.
There's millions of regulated facilities. And thinking about doing compliance and one-at-a-time inspection enforcement case is hopeless. Okay, that's never going to work. It's not even a good idea to do it that way. That's very expensive to do it that way. You got to design the rules so that they have good compliance in general.
I had to know, are people doing this on purpose?
There's certainly are criminals out there who know what they're doing and they deliberately violate and they put people at risk and they say whatever. Okay, there's certainly people like that. This is why we have criminal enforcement. That definitely happens. The bulk of the time, there's all the mess of regular life applies in. They do not do the things that are necessary to keep that from happening. They don't buy the equipment. They don't train the people. They don't operate it properly. They don't have enough money. Things break. Someone doesn't show up to work.
Okay, makes sense. But guess what? There are a lot of these sites.
In hazardous waste, some of the companies that produce larger amounts of hazardous waste, there's 40,000 of those, roughly, in the United States. And there's a handful of inspectors, okay? And these are just the large ones. The gap is huge. So EPA is constantly looking for resources to help us maximize the use of the available people.
The numbers are stacked against the EPA inspectors ever being able to do this as well as they'd like. So there are 40,000 of these sites. The EPA can only inspect 2% of those each year. That's a lot of sites that are unaccounted for. One Sunday morning, over a decade ago, Cynthia was reading the New York Times, and Michael Greenstone was in there.
And he had published an op-ed in the Sunday Times talking about a study he had done in India, which was entirely about compliance with environmental rules and the use of third-party auditors to do that.
It was an op-ed titled, "See Red Flags, Hear Red Flags."
I was so galvanized by this op-ed that I did something that I had never done before, which was on a Sunday morning, I logged into my computer and went to an economics journal and downloaded a copy of Michael's whole paper, which I proceeded to read on that Sunday, and contacted Michael the very next day and said, "We have to talk."
What made the op-ed so exciting to Cynthia wasn't anything specific about the project, so much as the approach.
It was a little window into what Michael and his team do at the University of Chicago, which is bringing rigor and science to problems that really matter in the practical real world. And as someone in enforcement lives in the practical real world, we're all about what goes wrong, what's the mess, where's the problems. We're all about what is the gap between what was hoped for in a rule and what's actually happening on the ground. And to see that there was somebody bringing rigor to bear on those questions, it was galvanizing for me to say, oh, this is great. Maybe there's more people like Michael out there. No one else is exactly like Michael, but we had exchanged a lot of really great ideas. I solicited him to come and do some helpful work. I gave him lots of information of things that we were learning inside of EPA that would be helpful for guiding his future research. And I subsequently went to the University of Chicago for a brief period of time and worked with Michael there to come up with some creative new projects that they could do.
Creative new projects. This was 2013, and Michael wanted to use a tool that we wouldn't start thinking about in a big way for a few years: artificial intelligence. He knew that algorithms were suggesting movies to him on Netflix, books on Amazon. When this technology was clearly available, why were inspectors stuck with outdated tools to choose the best sites to inspect? It's a little like Moneyball. The method for picking things was expensive, time-consuming, and there was data they could use all around them to make the whole thing more efficient. Michael was sure that AI could solve the problem of the inspectors, that there's not enough of them and not enough time, by having a computer crunch the numbers and say, hey, these sites are most likely to be violating. So inspect them.
So the goal of this project was to see what AI could contribute to doing that and to feed in the data that EPA has about, what has happened in the past, what inspections have been done, what kind of violations were found, and, task that computer with up-to-date AI tools with trying to predict which facilities would be the ones that would have the biggest, most serious types of violations.
First, Michael had to find someone who would be interested in figuring out a way to do this.
I thought it was really exciting. A lot of times in research, we don't have the opportunity to do such a large-scale experiment and also to have really a direct effect on environmental regulation at the national level.
This is Catherine Meckel. She had just finished her PhD and was at the University of Chicago working as a postdoc. It's a period where academics spend time getting more research skills, and this project was perfect for that. Because even though Michael and Catherine were confident that they could use AI to find more violators, they didn't actually know how to write that software program to do it. Luckily, they worked at a university, so they enrolled in a class.
It was called Big Data Inference at Scale, and I think the class tagline was making good decisions based on large and complicated data, which is kind of exactly what we were trying to do. It was at 9 a.m.
In the winter in Chicago, by the way, the coldest place I have ever been.
It was like a complicated path to the class down in the basement. And I was often going to the wrong classroom first. I tried to sit up close to the board so I could see what was going on, or close to the projector. because he would have all this code on the board. And so I was trying to make sure I could see it. It was a pretty, what am I trying to say, math-intensive class.
During the course and afterward, Catherine and Michael built the model that would help Cynthia's conundrum, the issue of not enough inspectors and not enough time.
The first step in this whole project was seeing if we could build a model that would provide a detection rate that was higher than EPA. It was just kind of an open question of, if the EPA inspectors have a ton of insider information on these facilities that we can't observe in the data, they might just be much better at predicting who's going to be in violation.
Michael and Catherine decided to do this by looking at one specific category that gets inspected.
We decided to focus on the largest facilities, which are called large quantity generators, and also the worst violations, which we defined as a severe violation, or that's what we call it. Those were the ones with the greatest potential to harm the environment or be a potential risk to human health. Big industrial facilities. I remember there were some facilities that made paint thinners. There are some very large facilities that make a variety of chemical compounds. Very large medical centers can sometimes, because they have a lot of hazardous waste. It can also be things like really large construction projects that go on for years. Sometimes these facilities, I think, even have their own zip code or it's close to that.
Typically, once an EPA inspector chose a site and then went to inspect it, their intuition and accumulated knowledge led them to a site that did have severe violations, 4 out of 10 times. The EPA calls this the detection rate. The status quo detection rate was 40%. Michael and Catherine wanted their model to beat that. They were using 10 years worth of EPA records. It was a lot of data to sort through.
We had around 5,000 variables initially, and we then generated a lot more variables by summarizing the variables over historically. So let's say one of the variables would be, did you ever violate the Clean Water Act? And then we would say, did you ever violate the Clean Water Act last year? Did you ever violate it in the last 5 years? Did you ever violate it in the last 10 years? So there's 3 variables that we're making out of 1. So you have to have a way to figure out what's really important as a predictor of violations in a disciplined way. That's kind of a perfect place for machine learning to come in and solve that problem. The machine learning model doesn't just take the data and run with it. There's actually a lot of decisions you have to make about how to reduce the number of variables down.
So after she and Michael finished the model, they tested it against how well the EPA inspectors had done historically. Would their model be better?
So the human detection rate was about 40%, and our model's detection rate was 56%.
That's a significant improvement. I'd rather have a 56% chance of winning the lottery than 40%. They proved that their model could work, but this was a sort of trial run. No sites were inspected using the model. Now it was time to send it to the big leagues, the real world.
So we have to go out to the field and say, let's really test this model's predictions where we can observe the detection rate for all of the facilities that the model would like us to inspect.
That's where Cynthia comes back into the story.
Let's put this system to the test by having it predict in the future what's going to happen in the future. And let's put those head to head. Let's have the model pick some sources, and let's have the people who normally do inspection targeting pick, and let's have them both do their work simultaneously, side by side, and let's see how it goes.
How it goes? After the break.
If you're getting a lot out of the important research shared on this show, there's another University of Chicago podcast network show that you should check out. It's called Not Another Politics Podcast. Not Another Politics Podcast provides a fresh perspective on the biggest political stories, not through opinions and anecdotes, but through rigorous scholarship, massive data sets, and a deep knowledge of theory. If you want to understand the political science behind the political headlines, then listen to Not Another Politics Podcast, part of the University of Chicago Podcast Network.
Cynthia, Catherine, and Michael wanted to know how their model would work in the real world. The entire universe of sites, to use their language. Their second experiment would go like this. There would be 200 inspections. 100 sites would be chosen by the machine. 100 would be chosen by humans. Which method would find more violations and therefore be more effective? It took several years.
In the beginning, it looked like we were beating the EPA by a huge margin, but then more facilities came in and we were closer to tied with them. And so there was kind of like up and down over the years, getting our hopes up that this had really made a difference versus not.
The experiment ended this year. The final results?
So we had 177 inspections, and the detection rate for the model selected inspections was 50% compared to 28% for the EPA inspected selections.
50% is like a big amount. I thought it would be better. I didn't know it was going to be 50%. That's pretty good. I mean, I think anyone who says 50% gets the inspector's attention. It's not 7% better, which would still be good. Okay. 50% is, hey, you got to pay attention to this.
The work isn't done, though. The next stage, the part that's happening right now, is getting humans to accept the machine's help.
It's really impossible to overstate the importance of having done the field study, because inspectors are, by nature, skeptical people. Okay, that's what makes them good inspectors. And the field study shows that it actually works. It's been tested in real life as a prediction model, not a retrospective look back. So it's not theoretical. It's been demonstrated to work in real life. And I think inspectors look at evidence. They're skeptical, but they can be persuaded by evidence. And I think that's very powerful evidence.
Cynthia thinks that, like all great tools, this model has the potential to be used in more places.
One area in particular that I have hopes for with this strategy is in climate change, like being able to find the places likely to have the biggest methane releases. That has proved vexing so far because in the oil and gas industry, which is where the largest volume of releases are happening, have thus far proven unpredictable. Just couldn't be more important to control methane as much as we can right now, since it's the most climate-forcing pollutant that we can do something about right away today.
I asked Cynthia why she was open to this experiment.
Not everybody is open to AI, and we see all around us reasons why people might not be open to it. But I think this is a good illustration of the positive power of AI to help people solve problems that are very important.
I've talked about Michael quite a bit this episode, so now let's talk to Michael to get the inside baseball on Moneyball for the environment.
Amy, I have a great surprise for you. I am going to turn the tables in this conversation and start it by me asking you a question. One thing that struck me listening to the conversation you had with Cynthia was there was this moment when Cynthia contacted me about something I had written in the New York Times. And it got me thinking, well, Amy writes things in public, much more public forums than I do with 100x frequency. what, does Amy get emails like that? And do people call her? Do they yell at her? Do they applaud her? Do they hold her for parade? I'm like super fascinated. And what do you do when you get those replies?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. Sometimes it can feel like you're just writing into a black hole. And so it's nice to hear from folks and to know that what we're doing matters. The most interesting inquiries I get are the ones that provide an interesting insight or another potential news nugget that builds off the story that I had just published. And I publish a range of types of stories. I wrote one recently on how change happens in the world. And I got a lot of responses of like, wow, that really crystallized what I was feeling. Thank you for writing that. And then harder news stories, people would respond with, you forgot this angle. You need to write about this. And sometimes I disagree and don't think that's a story, but sometimes people do have interesting nuggets. And stories and reporting are often like a snowball. The more you go down a direction, the bigger it gets and the more interesting it gets and builds on itself. And so I tend to get a bit of everything. Whereas you, Michael, you're really only getting the people who are willing to read a very long research paper, or in this case, a very well-written op-ed.
I do get emails occasionally, with much less frequency than you, I'm sure. Like the nightmare that I live with as an academic is that, as a friend of mine once referred to, my little studies. And I'm writing my little studies for my friends, and then they write their little studies for me. And that's kind of the end of it. And so I remember very clearly exactly what Cynthia was describing. I got this email from the head of enforcement at the EPA, and she was like, oh, I'm really interested in what you're doing. And I think it highlights something that is very rare about Cynthia, which is that she wanted to introduce these ideas from economics into the way the EPA functioned. And I was trying to think about it, like, as I listened to your guys' conversation, like, what's the flip side of that? Suppose I went to one of my faculty meetings in the Department of Economics and said, I've got a great idea. We're going to get some EPA inspectors to come here, and they're going to tell us how to do economics better. That would not go over very well. And Cynthia's openness and curiosity, like a lot of the best things that come in life are from these arbitrage of different fields. And she deserves a lot of credit for doing that, because I knew internally that was not very easy.
I think that's great. And, what you just said about the arbitrage of different industries, I think that's the importance of getting out of your silos. And I think if you only listen to the people in your room, you're not going to get much done.
What field do you want to arbitrage with now?
Well, I recently got back from a editorial-wide retreat at Axios, and artificial intelligence was just the hot topic. And I'm an amateur user of AI. I use it in pretty basic ways. I don't know much about how to really use it to its fullest extent while keeping my brain functioning and without risking journalistic integrity as well. I think some people could ask ChatGPT to write stories for them, and that would not be something that should be allowed. And so I certainly have a lot to learn there. But I mean, you are applying AI in a very powerful way.
And I'd seen the movie Moneyball, and, there's this line that's stuck in my head where they have one of the old style scouts sitting there discussing the baseball players. And he's like, yeah, that guy's girlfriend's really pretty. He's definitely going to be a great player. Or that guy's girlfriend isn't so pretty. He doesn't have a future in baseball. And I was like, that's a crazy way to make decisions. And that's how a lot of decisions get made, on gut. And so the conversation with Cynthia and Catherine and me was, could we find a way to improve decision-making about where to inspect plants, given that there's not enough resources to inspect every facility? It had all the classic hallmarks of a AI problem, which is like bazillions of variables, and where there's some secret truths hidden in there, and how could we pull them out? The technical part of it was not that hard once after Catherine and I had taken our class, but the getting human beings to accept it was the really hard part. We had the view, okay, yeah, great. we're going to go into the historical record and we're going to say, these are the inspections the machine would have chosen, and these are inspections you guys chose. Who would get a better detection rate? And we had a 50% increase in the historical record using the machine over what they were accomplishing on their own. And I really thought, chest all puffed out, went back to the EPA, and Cynthia was like, this is it, Cynthia. Here's the answer. And she went and took that answer to the people who work for her, who are basically those baseball scouts sitting around trying to figure out where should we inspect next. And they were like, no, these guys don't know what they're doing. They're only using historical data. We have special information. Now, I heard all that as we can tell which facility has the pretty boyfriend or the pretty girlfriend. And so we really know. And so I thought it was all BS, but it didn't really matter what I thought. Those are like human beings and they're in charge and they were running EPA regions. Cynthia was like, they're not going to do it, guys. I can try and order them, but they're going to undermine in the end. So it's really kind of deflating. And we went away. And then I called up Cynthia and I said, hey, let's do a horse race. I challenged those guys. And it did even better than it did in the historical data. But the really important thing I thought was that technology doesn't just run roughshod over everything. There are human beings who are used to doing things their way. They believe in it. No one wakes up in the morning and thinks I'm doing a less good job than some machine could do. And it was an important lesson. And it was actually watching Cynthia navigate the politics of that to make it happen inside the EPA was super fascinating. It's certainly not like a muscle or skill I have.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So I had not seen the movie. So I had to do a little homework and watch the movie. And I loved it. I thought it was really good. So thank you, Michael, for giving me a good reason to watch that movie. And it was interesting to see that the humans disgruntled and convinced that this new way of doing business was not going to work. And to kind of go a little bit meta here, it's another way of people do not like change and doing things differently. And whether it's, picking a baseball team or living in a world where AI is changing things so damn fast that we have to adapt. And to quote Billy Beane, he says, adapt or die, somewhere in the movie. And I wrote it down because that's how I feel. And as a journalist living in a world of AI, AI is not good enough yet to write a story cold, but it might be someday. So, I'm working on other skills to make myself relevant in a world run by AI, but you have to adapt and it can be a little scary. So it's a balance of rising to the occasion and embracing the change, even if you don't want to, versus not letting your hair go on fire and be all crazy about it. And, I think this example and application of AI is the exact way to use it. And instead of, one of my favorite uses of it is asking it to write satirical lyrics for songs. Like I asked it to write a satirical song from country music because all country music is so sad and depressing. So anyways, it was a hilarious set of lyrics and it makes me laugh. And that's a useless form of using AI. And, good thing we can have both because we have all this clean energy sitting around being used to power. I'm just kidding. No, we don't.
Wait, Amy, can you off the top of your head remember your favorite lyric from the song?
Yeah, it says, my truck's not broken. It's electric and clean. And my mom is just fine. We talk every week.
One thing, just to bring us back to...
Away from country music songs?
Yeah. In the back of my mind, as an academic, is like, is this going to be useful for anyone besides my friends? Who, and I desperately do want them to admire or appreciate or think that my little studies have some value in the real world. The person who said to me little studies, I had agreed to work in the Obama White House for a year. And so the year came up and everyone's like, you're not going to quit. Like, everyone stays the full 2 years that academics are allowed to stay. And I was like, no, I'm leaving. So then it got passed on. And kind of the head of the economics team at that point was Larry Summers. And he calls me into his office. He says in the most derisive way, "Michael, are you really going to go back and work on your little studies?" And I said, "Yes, Larry, that is true."
Wow, little studies. I think you might want to talk to your ChatGPT therapist about that. I think the comment that Larry made about your little studies could be impacting you to this very day and giving you a complex about the impact that you're having in this world.
Okay, so exactly. And so then I was working on my little studies, and Cynthia emails me about one of my little studies, and I feel like maybe it wasn't a little study in the end.
So, but to be clear, you did just stay 1 year and then you left.
I left, yeah.
Good on you. You stuck to your guns.
In any event, this episode does demonstrate that the little studies can be useful because Cynthia used them to kind of reform how inspections are targeted, but she did it intentionally in this somewhat obscure EPA program. And once there was proof of concept of that, there's been adoption of this idea and the use of AI-based targeting much more broadly because it had been proven inside the EPA. And so then the EPA is now using it for its Clean Air Act programs. It's in the process of adopting it for its Clean Water Act programs.
Currently, right now, the EPA under President Trump is adopting this program.
It started under President Biden, but they're continuing to do it. In fact, it's kind of part and parcel of the greater government efficiency approach, which is one interpretation of what's going on in the current Trump administration. And what was striking is we didn't need to go through all the machinations of convincing people 87 times and getting the historical data and then running the field trial. And in fact, we then went to the state of Colorado, and Cynthia opened the door for us there, who they regulate methane releases from oil and gas sites. And we basically showed them the work from the EPA, and they were like, okay, forget it. We're wholesale adopting this machine learning based approach to targeting their inspections. And so I think it is, trying to justify mine and other academics' contributions to broader society. It's like a demonstration of how like these ideas get produced inside the crucible of academia. And sometimes you worry that it's hermetically sealed and they'll never get out. And this is at least a victory for ideas that are produced inside that almost hermetic seal.
You mentioned the Trump administration, but that's actually kind of amazing that it's being implemented by this administration. It's not, knock on wood, it's not being politicized. It's just a more efficient way to do good environmental work using AI. And that's kind of incredible in the world that we're living in.
Yeah, it's we were always a little uncertain on how to present the results because you could say that you could increase the number of violators by holding the number of inspections constant because you were improving the hit rate. Or you could say, actually, I just my target is to get a certain number of violators each year. And in that case, you would just need fewer inspections. And Cynthia, when she was working at the EPA, was very sensitive and I understand why, to that latter way to describe the results. And so we tried to present the results both ways.
So how is it being implemented today? Do you know?
There are large budget cuts at the EPA, and I don't know the exact details, but I would have to assume that the total number of inspections is going down, but they're now better targeted.
Right. And in this day and age, when everything seems a little chaotic, we're going to take the wins where we can, how we can, even if they're smaller than what they might have been in another world. Thank you, Michael. Until next time, talk soon.
Until next time, Amy.
Shocked is part of the University of Chicago podcast network. It was produced by Jesse Baker and Eric Nuzum of Magnificent Noise. Our production staff includes Christine Driscoll, Amy Pedulla, Sophie Bridges, Jamie York, and Samantha Henig. Our sound designer is Kristen Mueller. A big thanks to my co-host, Michael Greenstone, a professor at the University of Chicago and director of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Growth. He also serves as executive producer of Shocked, along with Sam Ori, the executive director of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Growth. The Institute combines a 360-degree approach to education with frontier research having an impact in frontline communities globally. The Institute's efforts are driven by the need to balance climate risks with societal growth. To follow or support their work, see our show notes or visit climate.uchicago.edu. For more of my reporting, you can look for me on pretty much any social media. Search Amy Harder, or look for my byline at Axios. This is Shocked. I'm your host, Amy Harder. Thanks for listening.